Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NFL Edition. Taylor and I are getting together to look at this two-game slate for Monday Night Football. No showdown slate coverage today. We're just going to look at both games and try to pick a winning lineup over at DraftKings, or at least nudge you in the right direction to do that. If we do help you out in any way, please give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel. All right, let's get into it. We're going to go position by position and highlight the plays we like the most, and hopefully help you out. So starting off, quarterback Lamar Jackson obviously has the top projection. That should shock nobody, as the Buccaneers are pretty bad against fantasy quarterbacks, specifically against running quarterbacks. So this matchup just looks really good for Lamar. The only problem with Lamar is he's expensive at $8K, and he is also very, very owned, coming in at 46%. So I have a lot of interest in Lamar. This does feel like a spot where I don't really care about ownership that much, but he's going to be almost 50% owned. So this is obviously an immediate leverage opportunity if we can get it right. So what is your interest level in Lamar? And if you're not going to play Lamar, who are you looking to pivot to?
I'm definitely going to play Lamar. I'm going to play Lamar a lot. I don't care about the ownership. I don't really see an alternative. I know these quarterbacks aren't bad. It's not like there's Will Levis on this slate, but he has the most upside by a mile still. His matchup is good, like you said. He's expensive, but I don't really care. His pieces aren't really expensive around him, at least the passing pieces. So I don't really see a way around it. Even in at massive ownership, I'm going to just play him a ton and hope other people don't somehow.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you for sure. Price and ownership be damned. I just think Lamar is the best play. The Buccaneers are a really soft matchup for quarterbacks. They're the 30th against fantasy quarterbacks. They're worse than the Ravens, or I mean, not as bad as the Ravens. So, I mean, you can definitely consider a pivot to Baker Mayfield, who naturally is the second highest owned quarterback on the slate. He's not that far behind Lamar Jackson in terms of raw points projection either. So I do like Baker as a guy who's, half is owned as Lamar. I think he's a fine pivot in probably the game of the night. In theory, you could make cases for Kyler Murray and Justin Herbert just because they are dual threat guys. That game just is going to go overlooked. I mean, look at the ownership here. Kyler Murray, 18%, Justin Herbert, 14%. The problem is, though, Kyler Murray is so freaking hit or miss. And by the way, the Chargers are really, really good against quarterbacks and just good defensively in general. But Kyler Murray's game log is gross. 15, 28, 15, 9, 25, 12. So he's just all over the place. Obviously, the ceiling is there in general. So if you want to go for a low-owned Kyler, I'm not going to, take you away from that. But yes, if I had to pick one guy, it's 100% Lamar. And this is to me, it's a don't get cute situation. So he's the guy for sure for me as well. So yeah, moving over to running back, Derrick Henry leads the way. Obviously, it's just team Ravens here, just because the Ravens are in a pretty good spot. I will say, though, the Buccaneers are pretty good at stopping straight up rushing yardage against running backs. They're top 10 in that regard. The way you really get to Tampa Bay is through passing to running backs. That's how they're giving up a lot of their production. That said, Derrick Henry is Derrick Henry. He's been an absolute force all season long. He's averaging 24 fantasy points per game. The Buccaneers are still giving up production overall, and this guy is just fading Derrick Henry is not a fun idea. He's had 28 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. He's had 16 plus fantasy points in all but 1 game on the year. So let's start it off with Derrick Henry at running back. Are you going, over on the field for Henry?
I didn't really get to talk about the other quarterbacks, but I think Mayfield is a fine secondary play, and I will have Kyler Murray in some of my first lineups, and I'm probably going to fade Justin Herbert entirely. Anyway, Derrick Henry looks great. Pricey, but it's just hard to overlook him on this slate. It's not easy to pair him with Lamar necessarily, but if you can, it's obviously quite appealing. The matchup's a good one. I think the best running back play on the slate, dollar for dollar, is J.K. Dobbins against Arizona. Going into the dome there, of course, Cardinals defense, not very good. The Chargers want to run. They have Justin Herbert, but they, under Jim Harbaugh, whatever, want to run. So Dobbins has been the beneficiary. He's been good all season. I think he's kind of run a little hot, but he's got touchdown upside. He can break big runs, it seems, even though he's completely washed physically. But it is what it is. I think the matchup's good. He is. He's very slow. He's like Austin Eckler. So he gets volume though, so that's all that matters. And I think he's a great play.
Yeah, the only problem with Dobbins at all is that he's crazy owned on the slate. He's only 6.4K, coming in with almost 70% ownership. So, like you said, if he's not going to really finish these runs that he's popping off, then you can definitely entertain being a little bit underweight on him. The only issue is like, where's the pivot? I guess it's James Conner, but he's also going to be pretty chalky. The ownership is really just divided between those three guys for the most part. You got Dobbins, then Henry, then Conner in terms of ownership and projection. That's the way it goes. So those guys are all good plays. I'm not going to talk you off of them because of price or ownership or anything like that. They all look pretty good. If I had to rank them, I'm with you. I'd go Dobbins, Henry, Conner, just like in the natural order that you'd expect. The real question isn't, are those guys in play? Yes, they are. The question is there a pivot that we can do? It's not a true pivot because these guys are all cheaper, but is there a cheaper guy we can look to get away from some of this chalk?
Not really. The Bucks have 3 running backs who are going to be in the mix tonight, and it sounds like they're just going to try to find a hot hand and ride the hot hand. So I guess you can take a shot on one of those guys and hope that that's the one that pops off. But good luck figuring that out. Matchup's also not very good for them. I think I'm more likely to look at Justice Hill as a pass catching back for Baltimore, 4,900. I think he's okay. And then Kamani Vidal or whatever, it's 4K flat. Backup Chargers running back. Got a huge pass for a touchdown last week. Didn't do much else, but he's got a role. It's a tiny slate. Running back is really a dog shit position tonight once you get past the top 2 or 3. So punting with Vidal is not the worst idea.
Yeah, I think it might make some sense to punt with somebody at the second RB slot. You eat one of the chalky guys, maybe 2 of them, and then you do this in the flex. I don't know, but I do think somebody like Vidal does make a lot of sense. Only 16% ownership for a guy who is going to get some timeouts. I'm trying to look at his snap count. If you can pull it up, my screen is going so slow. But obviously, like you said, he did play last week, had 4 carries, 2 catches. He did score a touchdown. So with Gus Edwards, I mean, that's decent. I think on a 2-game slate, we can absolutely take a crack at that at 4.4K. So I have a lot of interest in Vidal for sure. You could always just you hope that it's more of an even timeshare. You could hope that he vultures a touchdown. You could hope that they play from behind and he's used more as a receiver. Maybe, I mean, with J.K. Dobbins' injury history, is it crazy to think Dobbins at 70% chalk is just a good fade because he could get hurt? Not really. It's not bad. It's not like it's a terrible idea. Not 2-game slate. So I have a lot of interest in Vidal. Will be way over on the field. 16% is too low for a 2-game slate. You hit it on the head with the Buccaneer situation. I think you could absolutely play a Buccaneer on this slate, but good luck us seeing which one it is.
Like if you're entering a bunch of lineups, I think you'd be silly not to roll the dice on, Bucky Irving, Sean Tucker's only 4K, just like Vidal.
Is Rachaad White really going to be the highest owned one?
That's what I see.
Yeah,
it looks like he and Irving are they're both going to be double-digit owned. But I see only because it's a 2-game slate.
If a banged up Rachaad White, who's coming in and trying to work in with a running back room that has Sean Tucker, who went off for 34 fantasy points last week, Bucky Irving, who's been very good too, wouldn't you just automatically not play Rachaad White and just go a little bit over on Tucker? I mean, Tucker's like unowned. And then Bucky Irving was already factoring into this backfield. So Bucky Irving at like almost half the ownership of Rachaad White is a smash play, in my opinion. The matchup is not really what you want to see. The Ravens are more of a pass funnel defense, but I don't know. That's the way I would play. If I'm playing Buccaneers, I don't really have a lot of interest in Rachaad White, and I'd be looking at Irving and Tucker. I mean, Tucker is the cheapest one, so Tucker really stands out based on ownership and price.
Yeah, I have them Irving, Tucker, White in terms of my own exposure, but the gap between them is not very wide. I mean, it's a total gamble. Irving's a little more expensive than White. I guess people assume White is going to start and maybe get the first crack at it. I don't know, though. Like they said, it's going to be a committee approach, and they said they're going to ride the hot hand. So can't really do that with much confidence. Can't do anything in that backfield with any confidence. Yeah, running back's really gross after you get past Dobbins and Henry at the top.
It is, but I think if we're going to go get a punt in that 5K range, I think both Vidal and Tucker look really, really good as a flex or a punt at RB2. Is there anybody else at running back that you are gravitating towards. Oh, I will say Justice Hill is pretty interesting too, because like I said, if people are going to be crazy high on Derrick Henry, which fair, and the Buccaneers' run defense is actually pretty good, and the way to get to them is with pass catching running backs. Justice Hill could be a lot more involved than people think in this game. I think he is another sneaky option at only 15% ownership and under 5K.
Yeah, I brought him up and talked about him, so all good.
Okay, all right, moving
Thanks
on to
for
wide
listening.
receiver. Yeah, well, it was probably when I was looking for. I was trying to get the snap count over on Sleeper, and it was not loading for me, so I was probably just freaking out over there. All right, over to wide receiver. Obviously, the Ravens and Buccaneers are the best matchups to target. So Chris Godwin, Zay Flowers, Mike Evans all look really, really good. They are in that order is what their projections are coming in at, and they're all 39% owned or more. Godwin is second in ownership on the slate with 49%. Lad McConkey is coming in at number one, probably just because he's like the wide receiver one, and he's not even 5K. And aren't they down a guy too? Quentin Johnston is doubtful. So yeah, that is the main reason there. Anyways, looking at the top raw points projection guys, who is your favorite, and which one of those guys are you maybe going away from?
It's kind of Flowers and Godwin, kind of 1A and 1B. I think they're both phenomenal. PPR obviously matters on DK. Both of them are PPR machines, especially Godwin. They're going to be chalky. They're going to be the chalkiest receivers on the slate, but I don't really see any reason not to just play them. Flowers isn't even expensive. He's 6'6". Godwin 7,100. I think McConkey is okay. Like, receiver also drops off a cliff. I don't know what to do with Marvin Harrison Jr. I feel like he's kind of a chase that really doesn't get a ton of volume. Like you'd think he would, as Marvin Harrison Jr., but I don't know what's going on with him, if he's any good or anything like that. But I think Flowers and Godwin are easily the top plays on the slate, and then Evans is kind of further down the list for me.
I actually really, really like Marvin Harrison Jr. on this slate because he's not going to be very owned. He is a stud. His situation is just kind of volatile because Kyler Murray is an erratic quarterback and the Arizona offense is difficult to trust. Okay, the matchup is not good. The Chargers on the year do a very good job against wide receivers, and just overall their defense does not give up much production, certainly not a lot of points. But Marvin Harrison compared to Godwin and Evans and Flowers, like he's going to be at worst half the ownership of any of those guys, and he has the same ceiling, if not better. Also, Asante Samuel Jr. is not playing. He's on IR. Chargers are just banged up defensively. So honestly, we talked about this in our betting show. You liked the Cardinals at home as a dog, and the big reason for that is because the Chargers are not really at 100%. So I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is pretty sneaky at 7K. I'm not really decided yet which Buccaneers guy I want to go with. I'm definitely going to play Godwin or Evans, but instead of stacking them together, because just the odds of them both smashing in the same game are not great. My lean is toward Evans just because we know he can be a touchdown god. But I really like the idea of playing like Evans, and then instead of going and eating double chalk with Chris Godwin, going up and paying for a $400 cheaper Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the ownership will actually come in on Harrison Jr., but he's kind of a pricier guy. I'm just going to take a risk and fade. Like, obviously that could burn me, but I don't know. The volume hasn't really been there. I feel like he's kind of chasey. He's a big name and all that. I'm going to play Godwin and Flowers, and then I'm going to punt with a bunch of shitheads, and it's going to be glorious, I think.
Well, okay, let's consider this. First off, you're not wrong in one sense, but he did have a concussion in his last game. So I think that is a little bit of context we want to consider. When he had been playing, he had 15 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. Like the last game, he got 2 targets and got knocked out in like the first quarter against the Packers. So I think we just have to throw that out the window. And then the game before that, he just was inefficient in a tough matchup on the road against the 49ers, where they kind of just like ran the ball and somehow won that game. So I don't know if I would take those last 2 games as gospel. I think this is a pretty good bounce back opportunity just because the Chargers are banged up. But I will say it is an ownership play for sure. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a very talented guy with a big role. And And if he's going to be only 20% owned on a 2-game slate, I have a lot of interest in that for sure. As far as value goes, there's a lot of guys we can consider here. Obviously, if you want to leverage any ownership that Marvin Harrison Jr. gets, you can play Michael Wilson. He's actually going to carry ownership because he's only 4.7K. There's also Rashad Bateman with an awesome matchup at 4.3K. And then we noted the chalk, Ladd McConkey, the highest owned wide receiver on the board. So looking at that value, and obviously the chalkiness of McConkey, how are you feeling about sliding in one of these value guys? Oh, by the way, I'll mention Joshua Palmer as well, because no QJ. So I would imagine his snap count increases too.
Yeah, I'm getting to McConkey around 40% of the time right now. I think he's a totally fine play. Like you said, the wide receiver one, it's just an offense outside of Dobbins I have like little interest in, or maybe punting a tight end. So I'm not going to be like taking a huge stand on McConkey either way. I just think he's an okay value. Getting to quite a bit of Bateman as a cheap Raven just because I'm playing Lamar. Obviously, it makes sense to play him with Bateman. I like the Palmer call. I like the Wilson call. Greg Dortch is another one at 4-1. I think is totally fine in that Arizona offense. Nelson Aguilar, another punt Raven, I believe. Is DJ Chark going to play for the Chargers?
Let's see. Nope.
He's not?
Well, he's listed as questionable. He's still technically on IR, but I don't know that he's going to come back from a groin injury and play a ton of snaps right away. But obviously at 3K flat, if he's active, he is in play because of their injuries. By the way, McConkey, this will be interesting because he is questionable. If he doesn't play as the chalkiest wide receiver at 4.9K, that changes things considerably. So keep an eye on that for sure. I think he plays, but if he doesn't, that changes things.
Not only McConkey, but Semi Fehoko and Darius Davis are also questionable. They might have no receivers.
Yeah, so just based off of necessity, this is why McConkey's chalk. He's 4.9 in a wide receiver one role against the Arizona Cardinals defense that is not tough. Like it's not like it's a scary matchup by any means. And there's nobody there. So it's even more of a wide receiver one role than it normally would be. So I think that is fine chalk. I don't think if he was like 8K chalk, you could entertain going away from it, especially since he's banged up. But I think at 4.9K, I'm cool with firing up McConkey. I feel a lot better about him than Rashad Bateman. It's so funny because like if you have a showdown or a 2-game slate, you just kind of have to deal with what you have. But on like a big, like huge slate, are we really playing Rashad Bateman? No, we'd never play Rashad Bateman on a huge slate. So fair warning. I mean, worth noting, Rashad Bateman has been better than expected. He's been better than he was, last year. He's had 11 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. The Buccaneers are an amazing matchup, and he is cheap, a nice source of value for this tiny slate. So he's not a bad play. But if Rashad Bateman is going to be 25% or more owned, I will absolutely take the risk of him being overshadowed by, Henry and Zay and maybe the Ravens tight ends, or Lamar just, siphon everybody's production inside the red zone. So that is a guy that I like, but I will gladly fade and hopefully pivot to somebody who's just a little bit, a little bit overlooked. Is there anybody else a wide receiver that stands out for you? I guess Chark, if he's like starting a 3K,
yeah,
it.
If McConkey, Fehoko, Davis, and Chark are all questionable, there's a pretty decent chance, 1 or 2 of them sit at least. So like whoever's left, in theory, becomes a pretty interesting value. If they're all in, then it's a shit show. And I guess it's like Palmer and McConkey, and you don't really feel good about Fehoko or anyone in the 3K range. But keep an eye on that news, because if some of these guys sit, these values are going to open up potentially in the worst offense on the slate. But they also have Jalen Reagor. Apparently, they could elevate from the practice squad, that piece of trash. So that should be fun.
QJ isn't playing. So either way, Chargers wide receivers look like good value. I would much rather play a guy that has a pretty good chance of getting 10 targets than Rashad Bateman or Michael Wilson. That's just where I'm at on this slate for sure.
And the field will be there too. So that is what it is.
But even so, there's going to be some Chargers guy in this that does not, get the ownership they deserves. And even if, as long as McConkey isn't randomly out, I will eat that chalk all day. I don't really care.
And I think you can punt with one of the Tampa Bay third receivers, McMillan, Shepard, or Trey Palmer, and just hope for the best. Doesn't feel good, but on a tiny slate, you might have to take a chance like that.
Yeah, I was looking at Shepard because he's nice and cheap at 3.4, but with McMillan back, I would imagine McMillan is the guy they lean on a little bit more. If I'm going to do that, I mean, McMillan isn't owned, so I think I'd have interest in him. He's pretty talented. And just obviously with Evans and Godwin being so owned, like I mentioned before, I want one of them for sure. I'm leaning towards Evans. And especially since Godwin is like 10% more owned at the moment. So I think that's an easy call. But instead of getting the other dude and paying up for him, you can just slide in, like you said, McMillan or something. McMillan would be the one I would go with. I don't really want to mess around with Sterling Shepard. So definitely cue the 2-touchdown Sterling Shepard game. All right, so I think that does it for wide receivers. Nothing else that really stands out. I mean, there's other guys out there like Greg Dortch, Nelson Aguilar, but I don't really want to mess around with them personally. I think there's plenty of value to be had there that we don't really need to get too cute. I would just update the ownership before we arrive at lock, and kind of like you're mentioning, if McConkey is out or something, it's just all these Chargers guys are going to be carrying monster ownership. So, but that could be good chalk to eat. All right, so to tight end we go. Trey McBride is the runaway favorite here. He is 5.6K, way more expensive than any other tight end, but for good reason. He comes in with the best projection by far, and he's also going to be pretty owned. But all things considered, only 31% ownership for the best tight end on the board seems a little bit low on a 2-game slate. So I have a lot of interest in Trey McBride, but I also do have a lot of interest in getting different there. Cade Otton, I wish his ownership was less, but he's coming at 26% because he's only 3.6K, and the matchup against the Ravens is also pretty good. So I think dollar for dollar, Cade Otton is my favorite tight end play at 3.6K. He's a pretty good punt, and you don't have to get crazy with like DJ Shark and all these other wide receivers you don't want to play. And he has a good role. Cade Otton has been pretty involved. Let's see here, 6+ targets in 3 of the last 4 games. And if he scores a touchdown, he'd be a smash play. What are you thinking at tight end here?
Yeah, those are the top 2 guys by a mile. It drops off significantly after that. You have the Ravens mess with Andrews and Likely. Both are fine. Both are playable. Andrews is cheaper than Likely. Finally showed a pulse last week, but that was kind of buoyed by a touchdown, of course. Both are fine. I don't really have an issue getting to either of them. I think the value I like the most, other than Otton, would be Will Dissly. Hayden Hurst, I believe, is doubtful for LA. So Dissly, in theory, jumps into that tight end 1 role there, which is not a huge one, but 2,800. He's cheap enough. I feel better about that than I do about those receivers we were talking about. So Dissly is probably going to be one of my stands on this slate. And I do think a 2 tight end build is perfectly fine.
I was just going to ask, because I was thinking about that as well. I don't love the safety of Dissly. If I'm only looking at tight end specifically, Dissly just isn't a guy that I'm going to feel amazing about, but he's only 2.8K. So I don't want to pick.
And he's cheaper than like the 3K receivers who you don't feel good about. I feel okay enough about his potential volume to where that's like by far and away the best true punt, I think, on the slate.
Yeah, and then you can load up. I mean, if we're talking about all these different options at running back, but realistically speaking, if you can, don't you just want Dobbins and Henry and just like move on?
Yeah.
I
don't want to mess with Tampa Bay if I don't have to and all that.
Exactly. So like, honestly, you're kind of painting yourself into a corner if you get cute at some of these spots. Same with like quarterback. That is just good chalk to eat. Look, go play Lamar, go get Dobbins, go get Henry, eat that chalk. And then if nobody's going to go 2 tight end, if nobody's going to play Dissly at 15% ownership, you kind of are doing 2 things right away right there that not a lot of people are doing. You're playing Dissly, and you're playing Dissly with the other tight end that is going to be chalky. So I like that strategy a lot. That might be what I end up doing. And like I said, I don't really want to eat the Bateman chalk. So I don't know why, but I feel better about 2 tight end and Dissly, who have 15% ownership. On a 2-game slate, it's not chalk, but it's not unowned. But I don't know why I feel better about that than playing a chalky Bateman.
It's just, in theory, the targets will be there, especially if some of these receivers are out. You might move up the pecking order a little bit. It's really unfortunate that Will Dissly is like one of our favorite plays, but that's kind of the nature of the slate, I think.
Okay, but what's the other element we already talked about? All these Chargers guys, even the number 1 option that is going to be chalky, they're not healthy. They could be ineffective. They could get hurt in the game. They could be late scratch. All these things. By the way, it could end up spiking Dissly's ownership for sure. Like if McConkey's out, Disley's going to be more than 15% owned because by default, he's going to be out there a ton and, he's going to have to catch passes. So, but yeah, I like that strategy quite a bit. Looking at defense, it is a crapshoot. I'm kind of just going to let the system take me to where I want to go, or if I'm building just a single entry, I guess my instinct would lead me to the Chargers-Cardinals game. Chargers are the best defense on the board. I do think a good way to get leverage is to play more Cardinals players than other people are, like Marvin Harrison Jr. at 20%. But honestly, another thing is, Baker Mayfield can take sacks and throw picks and stuff. So I think the Ravens at 2.9K are pretty interesting, and they are chalky, which I don't like. But on a 2-game slate, I think they are the best option at defense. Not that it matters, because nothing ever goes right when you think a defense is the right call.
Yeah, I think playing anyone but the Chargers is good. They're going to be presumably the chalkiest one. They're the most expensive one. I'm just going to save the salary and not play the Chargers defense. Anything else is fine.
Yeah, I mean, you can still punt with the Buccaneers too at 2.4K. Just the savings alone is sometimes worth it with something like that. Like this past week on the main slate, the Giants and the Titans were viable because they cost nothing and let you kind of do whatever you want. I mean, everything else went wrong, including using those defenses, but the logic is still pretty airtight. All right, before we sign off here, let's do our flag plant. Who is your number one? Huh?
Will Dissly.
What's your number one guy to build around that you don't want to fade at all? And what is your general strategy going into this slate?
I mean, it's Lamar or Dobbins, but that's super obvious. So I don't feel like that's really offering anything. I guess my flag plant would be the 2 tight end build with Dissly and Otten or McBride. I just think there's upside to be had there. And with the shaky value at receiver, I'd rather take a shot on the tight end. So 2 tight end build is what I'm going to be building tonight. I'm
with you on the 2 tight end build. The other way to look at it for me is going to be, I'm going to go get the studs I want to because there's enough value to do it. And I'm going to eat chalk that looks good. Lamar, Dobbins, Henry, Mike Evans, they all look awesome, and I don't see a reason to not play them. So I'm just going to. And I'm going to do that tight end build. And then I am going to go overweight on Marvin Harrison Jr. And I'm going to try to get away from Rashad Bateman. All that's going to make me different, but I'm still eating enough of the good chalk plays that I'm not just getting cute to get cute. And then, hopefully some of these unknown guys help push me to the top here. Not really. The only thing I don't know what I want to do is with defense. I never do, because every defense that looks good doesn't work. And every punt defense also doesn't work. No defense works. they never work. All right. That is going to do it for us. Hopefully this helps you out. If it does, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.